I think it is a good thing. I mean, there were periods, like at the breakup of the Beatles where we weren't so friendly. So you couldn't do anything like this then, because the sort of hurt feelings and stuff like that would have crept in. The Beatles disbanded a global shock that once made the entire world real. More than half a century has passed, yet the question, who truly left whom, has never received a single agreed-upon answer. Then, in a rare interview with BBC Radio 4's This Cultural Life, Paul McCartney unexpectedly removed the veil of silence that had followed him for decades. For the first time, he named the very causes that pushed the Beatles toward collapse. Paul mentioned the internal shock when a member was arrested for prohibited substances, and he stated that John Lennon was the first to openly declare his decision to leave the group. He even suggested that Yoko Ono's arrival was part of a larger plan by outside forces contributing to the group's unraveling. What then was the real reason the Beatles broke apart, and why did Paul McCartney say there were things he could never forgive? When asked about the moment the group's internal balance began to crumble, Paul did not hesitate. He didn't mention the usual explanations like musical disagreements or the pressure of fame. Instead, he took listeners straight back to Abbey Road Studios around May 1968, when the presence of a single woman overturned every unspoken rule the group had held. That was when Yoko Ono began appearing daily in the studio, not as an outside observer, but as if she had stepped into the center of operation, sitting beside John at every recording session, whispering, giving input, and intervening. For Paul, it felt like an intrusion. From their early days in Liverpool to Hamburg, from the Cavern Club to stadiums packed with tens of thousands, the four Beatles had built a creative safe zone, a sacred space where no one, not even close family, was allowed while they were working. Yet Yoko appeared and claimed the right to step inside that space openly and unapologetically. Paul once bitterly recalled how Yoko placed a slip of paper directly on the piano keys while he was trying chord ideas for Martha, My Dear. It was a small gesture, but to him it was a blatant intrusion, as if she were trying to take a central position. But Paul's resentment toward Yoko wasn't only about physical presence. He believed she had a deliberate and calculated strategy to disrupt the inner structure of the Beatles from the inside. According to music industry whispers at the time, Yoko wasn't just an avant-garde artist. She might have been someone sent in by another company or artistic faction to dabblize the most influential band on the planet. Her constant recordings in the studio, her comments on harmonies, melodies, even giving John direction in creative decisions, made it impossible for Paul not to suspect something. Every move from Yoko seemed manipulative, with one clear aim: isolating John from the other three, thereby gaining full influence over him. Paul also never forgave the way he believed Yoko disrupted John's family life. He felt she intentionally drew John in during a vulnerable time, leading him away from Cynthia, the wife who had been by his side from the beginning, and pulling him into an all-consuming, deeply controlled relationship. Their private discussions after studio sessions held inside Apple Corps offices gradually turned internal band decisions into private conversations in which Paul, George, and Ringo no longer had a voice. At that point, the Beatles were no longer a group of four. Half the band was living inside a separate world, just as producer Glenn Johns once described with frustration. It wasn't just Paul. Even George Harrison, the gentlest member, couldn't hide his irritation. During a 1968 session, when Yoko handed John a sheet of paper while the group was working on the guitar parts, George glanced over and said quietly, but firmly enough to freeze the entire studio. "This is the hardest environment I've ever tried to work in." Ringo remained absolutely silent, but that silence made Paul see everything more clearly. Matters had moved far beyond control. No one dared confront Yoko directly, fearing it would tear John further away. But beneath the surface, discomfort, tension, and emotional bruising were piling up. The rumors about Yoko's control over John grew stronger. Paul could feel that he wasn't just losing his closest creative partner. He was also losing his place in the group he had helped build. At the end of that day's session, Paul paused before saying the final thing, his voice dimming as if he were releasing a secret long held. It was that quiet shift, that feeling of being pushed out that paved the way toward the moment I knew things couldn't be saved anymore. The story then moves to September 1969. London slightly cold, slightly gray, just like the atmosphere surrounding Applecore. By then, the band felt,